It's a little hard to figure out whether we need to stand or we need to sit.
Hello?
Should we stand or should we sit?
I'm standing.
Okay, I'll sit so we can balance it.
I guess we're the same size now.
See, this is the problem whenever we take pictures together. The photographer needs to find really critical angles to take our pictures to get it right. So, well, we are very glad to be here. Again, my name is Joel. It's truly an honor to be here tonight. We certainly don't take every minute of this moment for granted. Thanks to Plywood people for really working hard for a very long time to bring some of the greatest minds in our city together and really to push ideas that are changing the world and not just our city together. And so we are very thankful to be here tonight. And we are eightvillage, and we are a place-based design consultancy here in Atlanta, and we have work locally here in America, but also overseas. And we really strive to catalyze ideas, and every time we work on a project, we try to embed ourselves within that community for as long as we possibly can. We just finished a project, and we were in that community for over 6 weeks, living there. And so we moved actually our offices to that community and worked there for about 6 weeks.
Yeah, so I guess just not to reiterate our entire resume again, but my name is Pavan. I'm the one that literally looks like me. And I was raised in Atlanta. I have a huge passion for it. Usually I have a huge passion for everything I do. I went to Georgia Tech. I was actually the mascot there to show you how passionate I get about things. It's very cathartic to say that. It's a big deal. And as was mentioned, I've had such a great opportunity to work with some of the greatest people, I think, on this planet for design, including Joel as well.
And of course, this was mentioned earlier, but just to frame kind of where I come from, I grew up in one of the poorest places in the world, literally poorest places in the world. And so from one of the most disadvantaged places on the planet, 8,000 miles from here, to being a designer in our city and trying to drive ideas that will transform our city and the world is really, truly where I come from. And so the way I think about people, the way I think about the world, is really built from my experiences growing up in a slum with bad water and all kinds of things. So that's really what I bring mostly to the table.
Yeah, Joel and I really came together about that and about his story. We pretty much bonded over Revit, which is like an AutoCAD type, I'm sure y'all know. So we bonded over drawings, but we really bonded over this idea about a different process for design. And that brought us together. We both had these immigrant backgrounds. We both had these stories of where our families have come from. So that really brought us together to create what we're doing today. So a little just quick background on where eightvillage comes from. It actually comes from my family's name. Back in the 1500s, the king of Karnataka, where the state my parents are from, asked a group of priests, scholars, craftsmen, agriculturalists, all to come down from a different state to their state to help improve the kingdom. And in that same ethos, that's what we want eightvillage to be. We want to bring all these different facets and have this holistic design process that really helps, improves, and fosters a place. And we do our best to try to instill or learn about what we call place-based ecologies, which is essentially, we believe every place is an ecology, which we define as every place is an organism, every place has these different mechanisms that work together that really make that place a place everywhere, anything from the people to the planet to the environment.
So I think you might be wondering, well, how do you actually design a place-based ecology? And just like Pavan said, we live in a very complex world. In fact, one of the things that we love to do is to mediate very complex cultural nuances when you're doing a project. Just to give an example, right before we walked in here, we were both saying the same exact word, and the person who were telling the same word to did not understand what we were saying. We're saying exactly the same word, right? And so when you're asked to do a project in Georgia, and you're asked to do a project in India, and you're asked to do a project in Uganda, all those different ecologies are so complex, not in just what they eat, but how they think. And so the best way to actually design a place for Joel is to ask me, Joel, what was your experience in the slum? If you ask me, Joel, what's the best kind of room size you want? That will be the wrong question to ask. And so part of what we try to engage in our design process is to really dig deep and understand some of those deep culture nuances that then produce technical language for what we do. So this is really interesting. So you look at something that you typically find, but yet we see this as an opportunity to give back to. So this is actually a medical center in McDonough, Georgia, and so you look at it very dumb, very like plain. You'd find that in any suburb, but when we see it, there's a different opportunity to engage a very, very specific client and a very specific group of people. And so from something that is maybe dark to something that is bright, and really in this project, we really try to understand the client. So the client really serves patients who've actually tried all kinds of medicine in hospitals and they failed. And so this is the kind of clients that they see. And so how do you engage something that is different and flip really the role of the caregiver and the patient? So in this case, in a typical process, you would have, when you go to the doctor's office, a nurse will come see you, and then they'll take you to another dark room, and then take your blood work, and then they'll take you to another dark room, and then do some paperwork, and then they'll take you to another room. By the time you get to see the doctor, you really don't want to be there, right? And then this process is actually different because the doctor will come directly to you and walk you to the medical examination room where they will actually have an interaction with you.
Yeah, and just a little fun background on this project. That's actually my mom. She was my first client, our first client. So this was literally the first project we ever did, and it really started to give us direction in what we wanted to do. So we were very thankful for that. And you can imagine having your first client as a family member gave us all sorts of experiences, both good and bad. But she was very much a collaborator in all of this to create this space that we were talking about, and allowing us to really engage with her and her patients to understand what this space needed. But we were able really to flex our technical skill set with this project. And that's a lot of what we have as architects and designers. That's a lot of, I think, what we can be known for is our technical skill set. We do a lot of stuff like this, which are elevation drawings. This is actually a project that we were asked to do. We were asked to project manage both the design of these light installations. If you guys are familiar with this is Buhai Lights. Dashboard and We Love Buhai did an incredible job with this. We were very thankful to be a part of it and create the technical side of it, but as well as the community engagement side.
And so, like Pavan has said, that we have a very technical skill set. And, when you go to school, that's what you're taught. But the truth of the matter is that none of the spaces that we'll ever design are occupied by technical things. The places that we design are not occupied by apps. They're not occupied by, anything that is technical. It's actually occupied by people who actually have very, very diverse backgrounds. And so the process that we actually do is we'll take narrative and translate narrative to technical things. And that's how we move forward in trying to understand what's best for a particular client.
And in this case, we kind of went back and forth. So we took the technical, we took the narrative, went to technical, and we actually brought it back to narrative and technical at the same time. So a big role we played in this was actually designing how do we actually engage the community that this project is for. In this case, it was for kids. The light installation was this big, beautiful, inflatable light installation in a strip mall meant to create a place of play. And so we were tasked with, well, how do we actually get the kids involved? How do we actually have them feel ownership over it? So we designed this process to figure out a way for them to actually build their own light inflatables. We introduced them as artists at the actual light installation at the opening day. It was so great, and they got a chance to play, and they really felt some sort of ownership over the place, and I think that's a lot of what we try to do. We try to create this table that people may not know exists or are normally invited to. In this case, we tried to create this table that is normally, I think, encompassed by artists, but also try to get the community, which are kids, to that table and really create something back to the community.
So, you talk about translating something technical to kids. That's a really complex task to actually do. But again, like we've mentioned earlier, that to us we think that's the heart of innovation and trying to really serve people who may otherwise never understand what you're talking about. And so as people, people see their communities differently, and how do we actually get to unlock that? And so in this case, we translated workshops into workshops. Some of you might be like, are those two different words? Those are two different words. One is workshop, and the first one was workshop, okay? Somebody said somebody needed to be interpreting while I speak, which is it's fine.
That was me.
So these workshops were really trying to get a group of people to rethink what Hilliard Street is. And of course, Hilliard Street has so much history and has so much DNA to what our city really is. And so we got groups of people, and they began to walk Hilliard Street for 2 weeks, for 8 weeks in total. And throughout that process, we are trying to engage people who live there, people who have had really significant experiences there, to sketch, to talk about what they can, to send us images of what they feel needs to be done. And you go to a coffee shop and you sketch together, engage the people at the coffee shop, still on Hilliard Street. But then you really begin to get these crazy ideas. And so one of the people in the workshop said, what if we took the back of billboards and turned them into a place for public art? When you think about that, actually a lot of billboards, the back of billboards that is very mundane and plain, will many times face a public space. And so how do you actually translate that into, and that's something I bet you our little brains would never have thought about. This is something that came directly from the community. But then the end of it is one thing we question ourselves a lot is that, for example, again, when you do a project for a group of refugees, what's the end product beyond the built environment, right? And so in this case, the end result of these workshops was an exhibition where we had about 350 people come out, and this was people from the city, stakeholders, council members, legislators, businessmen, people from the community, and it ended in a dignified process that the community now had a tangible artifact that they could hold on to in form of an actual exhibition that was installed at Generator Space on the Beltline.
Yeah, the idea was really to foster this bottom-up type of urbanistic process. I think Joel and I had really talked about how the typical model for community engagement, particularly with municipalities, is for them to come up with the images and for them to put those images up at a public hearing at about 11 a.m. on a Thursday, and for you to go around with stickers and kind of pick your favorite one. The whole idea of this culmination, which we call the Ideas Fair, was to completely flip that on its head. The people came up with the ideas, the people came up with the images, the people came up with the words, and we presented them back to the municipality to talk about what can we do now. And a lot of these ideas that you see are actually happening today in various forms, and Hilliard's starting to slowly become a more walkable place.
So we actually transform places through intentional collaboration. And in our case, that takes us to really constantly think about what, collaboration is a common word that you find anywhere. But then when you begin to collaborate with a Ugandan who barely can differentiate between the word walk and work.
Which one?
Yes, walk and work. There's there's kind of a barrier that we have to constantly rethink on how to engage a particular group of people. And sometimes we've had to do just film. Sometimes we've had to do just podcast. And all they are talking about is nothing to do with the project. It has everything to do with where were you born, what kind of tea do you like, how do you make tea in your home? And we actually use those mediums to translate them into technical words. And that's all collaboration. So in this case, we had a project in Sparta, Georgia. I don't know how many of you have heard about Sparta, Georgia. All right. What? So Sparta, Georgia is, did I say it wrong, Pavan?
You got it. I just said there's one.
Oh, there's one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Three.
Three. Okay. Let's say
4,
five.
5.
Okay, 6.
6.
Well, Sparta, Georgia is about 2 hours from here, and so much rich history there. You know, a lot of, historic farms that, have lived there for over 100 years. And in this case, we collaborated with students from different universities around Georgia to go do a 6-week residency project there. And in this case, this is a tractor barn that we worked on there, and each one of them, and to us, this project really is indicative of what our heart and our goal is for our practice. So right as you see us really brainstorming, we had filmmakers, we had people whose specialty is in podcast making, we had writers, we had English experts, we had filmmakers, we had graphic designers, we had architects, and each one of them went out to the community every single day and brought something from the community to the table and have a design conversation. So the filmmakers would go out and just do film. That's all they did. That's what they're passionate about. They film people who've lived there. They film, families that have lived there for 2 generations. The writers would write. The graphic designers would figure out, what is the graphic language for a place like Sparta, Georgia? And that really informed what our conversations were. So each one of us was seeing the world differently. But when we brought it to the table, it really produced a really wonderful process.
And the really cool thing was all these people collaborated to transform this space. The architecture students were heavily involved with the build, but really that dialogue that we generated with each other, with these different disciplines, with the community, generated this gathering space for art and film. This is a picture from the big July 4th festival and celebration we had, and the idea was we would bring the community there, generate a dialogue. Our film students generated 4 short films of different people to showcase the diverse stories of people in a rural area where a lot of people may not think there are diverse stories, and it's a medium they're not often represented in. And they collaborated for this event and for this space to understand what the space could become in that conversation for art and film.
But you see, in this process again, we see something that was once abandoned, that has so much history, to now a place that is about people. And so for only $5,000, we were able to transform something for the community and people to have actual an artifact. So these films that were made, and in fact, the graphic designers produced an entire graphic template. And so Sparta, Georgia has now postcards, that you can actually go to the store and buy postcards, right? And that was a process of each one of those disciplines looking at Sparta, Georgia in a different way. And so that's an artifact that now the people who live there have and always have.
Yeah, and a big reason we did this initiative, which we fully initiated ourselves, which is a lot what we do, is we want to instill in future designers and architects to continually be proactive in our community. And be proactive, we believe that as architects, planners, and designers, we see the world differently, and we can use that view to collaborate with the community and come up with ideas that can change our communities for the better. So to kind of get into a little bit of what we're doing right now and initiating, one of them is actually directly resultant from a thesis I had at Georgia Tech, which is this idea of residual spaces. The whole thing started with a walk, kind of going back to how we see things differently. I had just moved back to Atlanta from Texas, hearing a lot about how we're having this affordable housing crisis, how we're missing spaces for equity. And I was taking this walk and realizing there's a lot of space, and I feel like the space can be used for something better. And the idea was that we wanted to look at this space as it existed. We didn't necessarily want to look up what is regulating that space. We just wanted to understand why that space existed as it existed. So this is actually one space that we consider residual. I don't know if you know DeKalb Avenue in Moreland, if you know where Little Five Points is. There's a residual space right there at the corner that I think we as people, when we walk it, it just seems normal. It's a buffer space that seems like it should be there from the neighborhood. But really the process of that space, it resulted from what we consider bad planning and segregative planning practices. This is a map from, I think, about the 1930s, a little earlier, and this space began to carved out when Moreland Avenue, and coincidentally, the 1960s and 70s began to expand its infrastructure as a state highway, and it started to carve out this residual space, destroyed a lot of homes, many of them African American, and now this space exists, but it's nothing. It's being used for literally nothing. It's bad for infiltration for the environment because most of it is lawn, and it's not serving any purpose. I've even talked to the Department of Public Works. They don't even use it for anything, and we believe that this space can be repurposed for something better, and really these type of cracks in places that are resource rich can be given back for equity in a lot of ways.
Well, just to give another example, we were recently working on a project, Bowen Homes. There's Bowen Homes in Kerry Park. And there was a 60-foot strip of land that literally runs along James Jackson Highway. 60 foot deep, and it runs the whole way. And when we began to do that project, we actually found out that that 60-foot buffer was intentionally left so that Bowen Homes was intentionally separated from Kerry Park, which was a more affluent neighborhood, and there was no street connection between Kerry Park and Bowen Homes. And so, and if you guys want to see that there is so much history in our city that is very, very intentional, and there is so much residual space, and that layers all kinds of infrastructure. If you want to see that kind of separation, go for an Atlanta United game, and you go to the train station, and then you see how many people are going southbound versus who's going northbound. You guys just try it out. Just try it out, and you will be amazed. Or even use your cell phone as you're going southbound. As soon as you begin going southbound from South 5 Points, your cell network is going to drop. And all those layers, as we experience the built environment today, are a result of really decisions and intentions that people have made for a long time.
And what we started to realize, especially through this research, is those decisions have resulted in all these different typologies of residual space. They've taken lots of different forms. And to be clear, this is not one blueprint for every city. Every city has its own version of residual space, particularly in the United States. But this is what we've discovered for Atlanta. So the Beltline has a slew of residual space. And Atlanta is somewhat notorious for having curves that disrupt the grid. And when you have that, you have a lot of interesting residual space that could be repurposed. And on the Beltline, it's really interesting. This is actually, I'm trying to think what could reorient you. Up here is the King of Pops bar, like right up north. If you keep going that way on Highland Ave, that's where Highland Bakery is. This space was carved out because of the Beltline hitting a straight road. And currently, it's just being used as lawn. It's just being mowed every week. It's not being used for anything. It's owned by this property here, and they really don't have any reason or have not been incentivized to develop it in any way. It's an odd-shaped space, but it's also on a very important part of the Beltline. It's where you come on and get off. So this could be repurposed for a park. It could be repurposed for a grab-and-go. It could be repurposed for hopefully a future transit stop with affordable housing above. It's just wasted space that's not being used, but we really think that it can be used better. And so this is one of the more crazier ones we found, and given who we are, we decided to take a closer look at it. This space right here was carved by two trails in what we consider a rather suburban development. This is actually just north of the other residual space I just showed. The King of Pops is right there at that spot right there. It's where you get on the Beltline. So again, another crucial node. This space was carved out by this townhome development here, which has more of a suburban type of planning. It's a lot of space, a lot of buffer zone, as Joel has talked about, by Freedom Trail coming through and by the Beltline coming through, and then finally a communication easement coming through. So you have all these crazy, all this crazy infrastructure and planning that don't necessarily are used to being adjacent to each other, creating this interesting residual space that, again, it's not being really used for the environment. It's lawn. A lot of us, again, lawn is not great for infiltration. It's not good for the environment. It's bad for just watering. And this whole space is just not being even used by people. And so we kind of took it upon ourselves to just have some fun and just try to design it to just show what it could become. And so what we realized is with a residual space, we could potentially create something better for the environment and better for people with that space to create what we think is the next step in that residual space life. So what we really looked at is how the space is functioning, how that ecology is functioning. And here, it was all about water flows and a really important part of the Beltline where water was coming off into the Beltline. So we said anything we put there in terms of housing needs to feel like it's not even there. And so everything we did, the roofs, the buildings are raised, roofs are pitched to allow water to drain like it usually is. We created these rain gardens for better infiltration. And we realized you can get a lot there, and a lot that could be used for good. And it's sort of this crazy idea, this crazy design, but we feel like this space can be used better than just looking at another communication tower or using a communications easement. That really, this could potentially be a proud moment on the Beltline, that we've reclaimed this residual space that was created from this bad segregated planning practice and now is hopefully some sort of presentation of what could be equity in the city. And one of the typologies of residual spaces, and this is kind of what we're doing now in terms of how do we actually initiate starting to develop some of these residual spaces, is the backyard. And so we saw a lot of oversized backyards as potential residual space. And so through this process, we actually engaged South Atlanta. We were connected to South Atlanta through one of my good friends, Heather Infantry from Generator, through my time with her. Yeah? Yeah? Okay, cool, yeah. No, she's amazing. Generator's amazing, but she's, yeah. And so she connected us with South Atlanta, a place that's lower income, a place that has historically been working class and blue-collar workers, but a place that's adjacent to the Beltline and is about to undergo a lot of rising market forces. And so we engaged with one homeowner here named Tanisha Corporal and told her, you have excess space in your backyard. You know, we have this idea that it could be residual, that it could be used for something better. And so through this process, we collaborated and basically came up with this concept called Backyard ATL. The idea of Backyard ATL is that we work with homeowners and we pay for, design, and build a unit in the backyard. In exchange, the homeowner gets a monthly payment every month for allowing us to build a unit back there. The homeowner is involved in the design. The homeowner also gets access to, if they so choose to, our pro bono financial advisor. The idea is that there's space back there, and particularly for a low-income homeowner who is vulnerable, like Tanisha, in terms of being adjacent to the Beltline. Currently, and I feel like I'm at risk at saying this for people to start just moving to South Atlanta, she pays about $30 in property taxes every year, which is crazy. She's literally like probably a 2-minute walk to what will be the future Southside Trail. So her home in particular, you can imagine, is very vulnerable for a big bump that could displace her, which historically that's how a lot of economic development displaces people, or gentrification displaces people. So the way this program was shaped is, how do we get wealth back to the homeowner? How can we possibly create a mechanism for homeowners to stay in place and reap the benefits, hopefully, of some of the economic development that's coming in? So basically, a backyard home, if you're not familiar with backyard living, it's an accessory dwelling unit, which is an ADU. It's basically just like a 500 to 750 square foot backyard apartment. It's not a tiny home. We're trying to be very specific that it's not a tiny home. We believe tiny homes are more of a movement. This is meant to be more of a dignified, real small house to live in. And currently, this is actually from our construction partner. If anybody's been to Air Serenbe, these are the Air Serenbe houses there. We're working with their contractor, and this is basically the ethos that we're going for with our homes, that they're these bright, big spaces, even though it's smaller living. And we hope that they can create these alternative choices, and again, through our program, give back and share the wealth with people who are already living there. And a lot of this, especially Joel and I have talked about what we realized through our research, particularly with residual spaces, is a lot of this is really just kind of suggesting we go back to what was normal, right?
Yeah, you know, it's hard because when I moved to the United States 2013, I lived in a very affluent neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee, Germantown, okay? And I was so blown away by how big people's backyards are and how much people actually did not talk to each other. I grew up in Islam, okay? There was no sidewalk. There was no square. There was no public space. There was nothing like private and public. You know, everything was public, right? And so to us, being able to really rethink such maybe a mundane space, a space that many people actually don't care for, right? To really create almost a network of people who are living in people's backyards, as in fact we are talking about building a digital tool that would be able to connect everybody in the city of Atlanta who actually lives in a backyard, to really create a social network of people who feel proud that they actually share space with people. And for us, we think that, how do you actually keep culture in place? Do you build more museums, or do you keep people in place? Because people embody culture. People embody story. People embody generations of information that has been, you know, layered and transferred. And so the goal of this is to really build wealth for people who are already there, and also keep that culture there by keeping the people who've lived there for generations there.
Yeah. And these are the goals that we're hoping we can accomplish with Backyard ATL. And so to be clear, with all the initiatives we create, all of the projects we're involved in, the idea we come up with is never set in stone. We always feel like they're ever-shaping, ever-changing opportunities, but these are the goals we try to lay out from the beginning. We hope that we can help build equity in these places, help homeowners build equity and stay in place, and be a part of any economic development that's happening in their neighborhood. We hope to create meaningful density, to create these places to be more walkable and healthy, and we hope to preserve the character, as Joel was just talking about. And just to kind of give you a little update of where we are now, in case anybody's curious, you know, these are our first 3 sites we're looking at in South Atlanta. Tanisha's site is right here. We're looking at a couple more properties to the closer to Carver Market and closer down near Lakewood. Oh, nice. I got some fans. And but we're very excited. These homes will hopefully start to be constructed in October. Really what we're seeing with this program is we can try to make a larger impact. We think that through this program we can help preserve more neighborhoods. Through this program we can help keep people in place and continue to allow them to build wealth in their neighborhood. And again, all of this kind of results in, I know we kind of covered a lot, but it all kind of resulted from us just understanding that we see the world differently. We really just want to collaborate and come up with ideas like this, but allow the community to help collaborate and create this idea. So, yeah.
Again, thank you guys so much for just this incredible opportunity for us to be here and chat a little bit. Thank you guys for listening and for your time tonight. Have a good one.
Joel, Pavan, woohoo!